says live.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's high-tech stuff. Good evening, everyone. Sorry for the slightly late start, but I think we are ready to go. I want to thank everyone who has sent in questions. There is a significant amount of questions that have been sent in, so I'm going to do my best to try to answer as many of those questions as I can. Just to begin, the government website was updated about 35 minutes ago at 7 p.m. with the latest test results that came in from the Ministry of Health and our testing. Today, the government of Bermuda received 57 new results for COVID-19 testing. Out of the 57 new results that we received, 54 of those were negative, and 3 of those were positive. Out of the 3 that were positive, 2 persons are not in the hospital and 1 person is. So out of the 3, there was 1 hospitalized person and 2 non-hospitalized persons. One thing that's important to note, that the hospital has implemented a protocol that every single person who may be admitted to the hospital, no matter what, is tested for the novel coronavirus. And so that testing itself happens. And so that's why we're able to so quickly say whether there's hospitalized cases or non-hospitalized cases, because anyone who's admitted is tested for COVID, regardless of what their admission is for. The others are certainly ones that are done in the community due to the epidemiology and surveillance unit, which will be testing contacts of previously known cases through the contact tracing protocol, which they're in. Out of the 3 new confirmed cases, all 3 were female. And the 3, as they were reported today, they are still listed as under investigation or undetermined. And as I said, 2 of those persons are not hospitalized, and 1 of those persons are hospitalized. So the summary of our particular cases, we have 86 total cases, and out of that, there are 46 active cases. There are 35 recovered cases, and there are 5 persons who sadly have passed away. And I would like to repeat what I've said before. Certainly, I'm sure that all of Bermuda joins us in mourning with those persons. And our job as a government is to do our best to minimize any future loss, recognizing the projections of which we've received from the modeling, but we still want to do whatever we can to minimize any particular future loss. Just want to touch on something on that issue of recovered, because I do know that there are some questions which came in, and some of the questions which came in were regarding what happens when people are tested, and whether or not when people are tested, when we say they're recovered cases, what is our view for saying that a case is recovered. In this particular instance, a question came in as someone tested 2 times in 48 hours, and then are they considered recovered? At this point in time, no, that is not done. Shortly in the future, probably this week, we will start implementing those testings to ensure that persons are not still carrying the virus. But what is happening is that they've implemented a protocol which is based on the international protocols, where it's 14 days, a minimum. At 14 days from symptoms, a minimum of that time, or 72 hours past any symptoms being shown. So if someone's tested on a particular day, they have to wait 14 days until they are given the all clear, or 72 hours past that 14 days, or any point in time when they are no longer showing symptoms. But given that we do certainly have increased testing capacity, we will be able to start implementing that particular protocol, which is something that has always been wanted to be done. But we have to make sure in the last week or so, we just want to make sure that we're being extra judicious with our with our testing supplies as they were. People would have heard that the main challenge with our testing supplies was the issue of swabs and viral transport media, as it's called. There's a global shortage of that. And I remember that someone actually from Public Health England, when we had made a request for swabs, they said that was like gold dust because it's very, very difficult to find. Thankfully, through the efforts of the public and private sector, and in this I'd like to certainly thank Mr. Stuart Lacey, who was very helpful in sourcing, but we were able to get 10,000 swabs, and those arrived on island on Wednesday. So those swabs which arrived on a Wednesday night were put into place and were tested. They're from a reputable manufacturer, but the thing that came with them was something that we needed to also validate and verify. It's something that the Food and Drug Administration has said can be used in this emergency instance because there's such a shortage of supplies. So we did validate and verify that, and those swabs are actually going to be used for collections, which are going to start tomorrow. One of the things which I know that, and if there's anyone who's watching in our hotel quarantine facilities, I want to thank you for abiding by the law and remaining in your quarantine facilities for the 14 days this is required. But public health nurses today informed persons that were in the quarantine facilities that they would be tested prior to them being released, and anyone who tested positive would not be allowed to be released. That is because, given that there is a 14-day incubation cycle, and it is possible that someone could start to develop symptoms on day 14, and that could possibly be inside of the community, we're just doing our best to make sure that we minimize any possibility of that. So there will be testing for those persons that are in the quarantine facilities, just to make sure that we don't have any particular challenges there. So just to make sure that we don't have any particular challenges when people get released. So I know that information was communicated to persons inside the quarantine facilities, and I just want to pay tribute to the officials at the Ministry of Health. It's been quite a roller coaster. They've actually been preparing for this and working on this since January, the minute that the World Health Organization declared this a public health emergency of international concern. And now we are approaching May, so they are, it would not be an understatement to say that they are tired because they've been working incredibly hard, but I think that it's a testament to their work. I think I mentioned at the press conference on Monday that they went above and beyond the call. So last weekend we were hopeful that we would have swabs that would be, and media that would be able to do a number of tests, and though we got some swabs and supplies from a new supplier, these ended up being not good enough to use. So we went from a position, and it's this roller coaster effect, where we went from a position last week Thursday of thinking that we had an incredible amount of swabs that were able us to do a large amount of testing last weekend, and it turned out that that was premature hope. So we had to then revert back to another thing, a third option, per se, a plan C. And because of the preparation of the officials in the Ministry of Health, and I would like to give a special shout out to Ms. Sakina Usher, and Mr. David Kendall, I think, who's above Ms. Sakina Usher, in working through those particular process. And also, I believe, I don't want to get her name wrong, I know it's Andresa, who works at the environmental lab at Southside, certainly working very hard in order to put together a workaround for us. So last weekend, they were able to mix a workaround that enabled us to continue our testing collection throughout the weekend, and also enabled us to test all persons at the Matilda Smith Williams nursing home, as there was concern raised there due to the contact tracing that there might be an outbreak at that particular facility. And because of their hard work, working over the weekend and Good Friday and Easter Sunday in getting those supplies ready, we were able to execute those particular tests. So there's a lot of stuff there. There was a final question, or not a final question, but I did see a question that came in regarding they are 3D printing face masks. Why are we not 3D printing swabs as they're doing in other places? It's not something that we've completely ignored. But the experience that Johns Hopkins University has, where we've been working with Johns Hopkins on the 3D printing of swabs, did not find them particularly effective. So that is not something that we've decided to go down the road of. But as was stated, that we did receive a shipment of 10,000 swabs on Wednesday night. So we have the swabs that are necessary to carry out our testing for the next few days. And our intention is in working with the Ministry of Health and also the efforts of Dr. Karika Weldon, who has returned back to Bermuda, though she's still in quarantine, that we will be ramping up a second testing facility, which is currently going through its verification exercise. And the plan is that next week we should be able to start rolling out additional testing and increase our volume of testing even more. The target of which we've certainly set is getting ourselves up to 200 tests per day by the end of the month. It's an aggressive target, but it's certainly something that's achievable. And with all the hard work that's been going on from various officials with the Ministry of Health, the community doctors who have been assisting, etc., I think that that is something that is achievable, and we'll be able to have that done prior to us getting to May 2nd, where the shelter-in-place ends, because the most important thing to do is to ensure that we have sufficient testing that will allow us to test and isolate and trace particular cases. Additionally, the information digital technologies unit of the government has been working incredibly hard. That's a unit that falls underneath me specifically, and that unit is working with the Ministry of Health on various IT solutions as well, in conjunction with the FinTech Business Unit and my Chief FinTech Advisor, Dennis Pitcher. So in that, we are going to be soon launching a contact tracing app, which is going to be based off of what's being done at a project in MIT. So we're paying a part of that particular project, and also looking at various credentials that will be able to enable us to better and more quickly open the economy. This will, of course, be completely voluntary. We're not going to require persons to download and install apps, but there will be some type of permissions that will be based upon certain things. So we're looking at how this is actually going to work. But one of the most important things for us to do as we bring on additional testing capacity and as we look to ease restrictions on movement around the country, we want to make sure that we are able to contact trace very quickly, very effectively, and make sure that we can isolate very effectively, because it doesn't make any sense having additional testing capacity if we can't necessarily follow up on those particular contacts of persons who may test positive, and then go ahead and make sure those persons can be properly isolated. So that's something that is particularly important. I know that a few persons have commented on my long and growing beard and mustache and hair, which is growing out, and wants to know when the gyms and the beauty salons, the barbershops will be able to be open. I would be lying to you if I said that those would happen on May 2nd. I actually don't think that that's going to be able to happen on May 2nd. I don't think that that's an actual possibility right now. But I do believe that our aim is to get them open as quickly as possible there soon after. So right now on May 2nd, it's likely, and these things haven't been laid out, so I'm going to ask persons not to hold it to me, but I'm just talking about our view of the way we're going forward. When we come out of shelter in place, we're likely going to revert to where we were before we went to shelter in place. So that was restrictions on retail establishments being open for customer traffic, but for curbside, same things with restaurants and otherwise. For the things that require close contact personal services, such as barbers and hairdressers and gyms and other particular items, we're finalizing what the opening requirements for those particular establishments will need to look like. But I certainly want to get those open as quickly as possible, not only for my own selfish needs, but for everyone else, because there are a large number of persons who work in those particular industries, and we want to make sure that they can get back to work as soon as possible. Okay, so I will, I guess, start getting to questions, because I think that's particularly important. The question says, any quality control process for medical supplies which your team got from over the world? Obviously, there's a number of countries dumped the PPE imported from China after failing the quality test. Absolutely. And that's part of the challenge for us getting those particular items. And so you would have heard, I said earlier, that we did get a shipment of swabs, which we thought we could use, but we were not actually able to use them. So we do have a quality control process, certainly, and we are continuing to make sure that anything that comes in is subject to that. There was another question. It says, I bought some Dunkley's eggs from Shelley Bay Marketplace Friday the 17th of April. Their eggs used to be about under $3. Yesterday I paid $5.49 for one box of Dunkley's eggs. Any ideas why suddenly eggs are gone up that much? I'm wondering if they put the prices up to allow for the 5% discount. I don't actually believe that this is an intentional thing regarding putting the prices up to allow for the 5% discount. I do believe that I saw something from the former premier who was speaking about the increase in costs out of supplies in the United States. So for that particular reason, I think that's there. But I do think that it's important to know that we did launch a form for persons to report price gouging, and that can be found at forms.gov.bm/report-a-price. And let me just make sure that that's the correct link. No, that is not the correct link. You can go on gov.bm, and if you go on gov.bm, there's at the top where there's that red banner, it says COVID-19 forms. And if you go to that place where it has COVID-19 forms, there will be a link to the site that allows persons to report any price gouging that they may feel that's in effect. We do have the power to prosecute and investigate that under law. The MP responsible for the Cost of Living Commission is the Deputy Speaker of the House, Derek Burgess. He's very passionate about this, and any reports that do come in, we will certainly make sure that they are investigated and followed up. And so I see some comments that saying the price of eggs do go up and down all the time. There is. We don't have any challenges right now with our supply chain coming out of the Northeast, but anyone who watches news will know that there are some challenges with supply chain issues which are taking place throughout the United States, just as we know there's food processing plants which happen to be subject to outbreaks. So we continue to monitor that situation. Our importers do not have any fear that there's going to be any challenges either in the near term or the long term, but we're continuing to monitor that particular situation. They said, will there be amendments to the unemployment benefit to include those of us who only had part-time jobs? Absolutely. I don't know if those are particularly amendments, but if you are having a particular issue with that, feel free to contact the department. I'm going to access someone who's worked with me because I know there's some additional information that was going out on that unemployment benefit. I know that we've paid up about $8 million in total, and 5,000 persons have been paid this particular benefit. In addition to that, I do know that they had brought on more resources last week to make sure they can answer and follow up with the calls. Some of the challenges of which we've had were actually that employer verifications, which is required under the law in order to happen. We were outstanding, so I know that we did inform persons who had applied that we were waiting for their employer verifications. This is something that's certainly a challenge, but I also want to note that I don't want anyone to go hungry. I don't want anyone to suffer. And we certainly do have a robust exercise by our helping agencies. And you can always contact the coronavirus helpline, which is at, what's the number again?
It's 444-2498.
It's 444-2498. And that is a number that you can certainly contact. There's a wide variety of third sector resources that are available. There is a lot of funds that have come in for that, and I'm grateful for the corporate community, but please do not suffer in silence. The last thing I want is Bermudians to be hungry. And if you are hungry, if you're having a challenge, make that call and we will make sure that we can support you. That is important. And that is important that we all support each other during this particular time, and I want to make sure that no one feels that they should be going hungry or suffering in silence. That is precisely what it is that we do not want to do. And when speaking of this unemployment benefit, of course, as they said, we did add additional persons to man the various phone lines. I know there were challenges, people coming through, getting through, so we have assigned even more resources to that particular project. And the number, again, is 7714. There's another question which says, can you please let us know what is being done and what is the ongoing plan to support Matilda Smith Williams' home where there are a large number of positive residents who are the most vulnerable in our population? That was a particular concerning situation. For us, we've seen the news about what happens in care nursing homes overseas and the challenges that can arise with outbreaks there, getting staff that are being shared, etc. We do believe that Matilda Smith Williams is the only nursing home currently where there is a fear of a possibility of an outbreak. However, as we ramp up our testing facilities next week, we will be doing widespread testing also in our nursing homes around the country and certainly our healthcare workers, just to ensure that we are safe in that particular regard. I don't particularly have the details, but I do know that there was a challenge at the Matilda Smith Williams nursing home this week, and I know that I got a call from the Minister of Health after her long day. She said that she was leaving her house to go to the Matilda Smith Williams nursing home, and I believe that was late Wednesday night, as there were some particular challenges there. Nonetheless, I do believe that those issues have been largely resolved. We are making sure that we take particular care there. I'm not entirely certain, and it was for privacy purposes that we're not going to release the amount of residents versus the amount of staff who did test positive, but it's a situation that we're certainly monitoring. Also, I know there was a question that persons had asked is why we were allowing persons who may be working at the nursing home in order to go home and possibly contaminate their particular families. We did offer anyone who was there who may not have the ability to self-quarantine effectively at home. Some persons do live by themselves, so it's important to recognize that. But we did offer the opportunity for those persons to be in government quarantine facilities as well. So that is an outbreak that we think that we've caught, but we're being extra vigilant and we're doing extra contact tracing on those persons. And as I said, we'll be ramping up the testing for other nursing homes to ensure that we are not, having a situation which creeps up on us. We know exactly what it is that we are trying to face. Interesting question. It says, given the circumstances, what are your thoughts on health insurance being tied to employment? With this being a public health crisis, do you think it's a time for free public health care? I would say that nothing is ever free. Certainly, anything that has to be done has to be paid for. But I think that it's interesting to see our public response. And for instance, when we're talking about opening up the second testing facility, it might be something that is outside of the traditional health insurance setup. So we need to figure out what that actually looks like. But I think there's scope for learning from this. But I don't think that there's any particular prescribed changes at this point in time in which we are looking at doing and are implementing right now. Our real and full focus at this time is on managing the public health crisis, making sure that we're able to reopen the economy safely, and figuring out ways to get our tourism industry back up and running. It says, I know you've been working hard on COVID-19 antigen tests for active infections. Any updates on antibody tests for people who have made the infection and already recovered? Is there progress? I would say it's mixed. This is a difficult situation. A lot of persons have seen these antibody tests, but the stories in which I give is the fact that the United Kingdom ordered 17.5 million of them and had to send them back because they didn't work. So there's a delicate balance of which we're trying to, I would say, balance between trying to get these particular tests and finding ourselves with bogus tests that may come in. So there have been some which have been subjected to a local process, which is before the Ministry of Health, for the Ministry of Health to go ahead and take a look at, and we're proceeding with that very, very carefully because it's better to have no tests than a bad test, and we'll say that. So there are some tests which are gaining approval from bodies around the world, and of course those are in difficult and short supply. But just as Roche was very generous in donating us 2 PCR machines and making sure that we had access to supplies to set up our secondary lab, they also do have a recently approved antibody test that they're looking to scale up their manufacturing on, and we've reached out through here to Roche locally to be added to that list. So hopefully we'll get those at some point in time. But that is certainly something that factors into our plan, but given that there is a question as to the validity of these kits that exist, we want to just make sure we are very, very careful. And right now they are not able to be used for diagnostic purposes. They're able to be used kind of for research purposes. But I think it will be important to understand and recognize who inside of the community, who inside of the in the Bermuda public has possibly contracted this disease. There was a question which says, my stepmom is 67 years old and works at a rest home. She has lupus and is diabetic. I'm very upset that her boss will not dismiss her due to her being vulnerable. Can she stop working and apply for unemployment assistance due to her underlying health issues, which should be penalized by our employees? I would say that that's a difficult situation. I would say that's a case-by-case thing. But we have to recognize and understand that there are protections which are put in place. And I think that as long as adequate protections are put in place, then I think that that is something that is acceptable. I would urge you to specifically communicate to have your mother specifically communicate with her particular employer if she has challenges with that, to reach out specifically to the Ministry of Health. I know they have care home liaisons specifically that's working there, and to have that conversation and that particular discussion on that. So if a doctor was to send her home or to put her under mandatory quarantine, then I think then she may be able to be eligible for the unemployment assistance. But it's not as though if you can self-refer yourself and then take advantage of that particular assistance. So that's something certainly that we're considering. I see a note that popped up on the bottom. Can Western Union or MoneyGram be open? There was consideration to the opening of money service businesses. That might be something that may be considered, not this upcoming week, but possibly next week, recognizing some of the particular challenges that exist because these things have been closed for so long. But we are looking and examining that. But just to be clear, there's no plan at this point in time to open up any money service businesses right now. Excuse me. That is not any type of particular cough. I'm suffering from a little bit of acid reflux. So my throat's a little bit irritated. Please forgive me. Some people may say it's because of too much Swiss blood. I'll see. On to the issue of other things opening. I think that's an excellent time to segue into the changes of, sorry, Ms. Hippolyte, are post offices going to open up? Post offices are not going to open up at this time, but we will be looking to see how we can restore limited services to the post office, and we'll try to see what may be done in those particular things. But given that we're trying to have people stay at home, it is doubtful that the post office will be open. But I do know that postal workers are working on limited and urgent deliveries, such as pension checks and other types of checks which need to get delivered. I know that the post office is actually working on Monday to deliver packets from the Ministry of Education for persons who do not have computers at their homes, so that students will be able to continue to work. So the post office, the government's not closed. Functions are still operating, and I know that there's additional skeletal functions that are going to be brought online. There was a conversation earlier today that I had with the Minister of Tourism and Transport about reopening TCD, at least with a skeleton crew for phone inquiries. So, for instance, right now you can go online. If you wanted to renew your license and you didn't have the ability to go online, but you want to call and possibly do a credit card transaction over the phone or something else like that, we're looking to figure out how we can do some skeletal staffing of some government offices over the next 2 weeks in preparation for the reopening, which will take place after the shelter in place comes to a close. Yes, that's important. A question about the Immigration Department as well. I see you, Ms. Francis. Certainly, that's something else that is slated. I know that they do have skeleton crews, and they're working out what type of skeleton crews and operations they'll be able to do. This was a conversation which has been held with the head of the public service that was held at the cabinet meeting on Tuesday, and we are looking to make sure that we can restore skeletal activities to government offices, especially over the next 2 weeks, as we know that there's some things that are important. And the last thing we want to do is have a massive bottleneck. So when we get to May 4th on Monday, that there's a big rush and big bottleneck. So we have to recognize that there's certain measures which are required to smooth the opening and transition of the economy. Running through, I know that Minister Keynes had said in our press conference last night about the new things which may be open. Just 1 second. Thank you. Sorry about that. My apologies. So it is the view of the expansion of what's going to take place. We recognize that these next 2 weeks we wanted to make sure that we did provide a little bit. We want people to stay at home. So there's questions about whether we're going to open up the Times Bay drop-off. There's questions where we're going to open this, open up that, open up that. The answer to most of them is no. And I know how difficult that is for a lot of persons, but our objective is to keep as many people home as possible. So we've changed the days which people are permitted to go out, and those will be put inside of regulations. So we will do that. I love my cabinet colleagues. My cabinet colleagues are amazing. So Colonel Birch is watching what it is that we're doing right now, and an email just popped up here regarding money service businesses that he said that MoneyGram has launched an online service. And so you can go to wallet.bm in order to access the MoneyGram online service. So I would hope that persons would take advantage of that for those persons who are looking for there to be money service businesses that are opening. And one of the silver linings in all of this is that as the Minister responsible for the Bermuda Economic Development Corporation, I was always challenged with how we did not take up online shopping in Bermuda, and we were challenged on how to get more persons to take it up. And I guess I was saying that necessity is the mother of invention, because now we're seeing more and more services which are being rolled out online, and I think that is a good thing, and that bodes well certainly for Bermuda as we go forward. So going back to the businesses that are looking to be open, one of the things of which we are making sure that we do is keeping it very, very limited, and I think that that was something that we made sure was relayed. So I think the additional categories which have been open are laundromats, and that's under certain restrictions. I believe the restrictions are appointment only, and the one thing we do not want to do is to have families in the same building in more places than the grocery store. So we're clear, but families in the same building in a small proximity that may be able to mix, because that's the one thing which we're trying to avoid, and that's the purpose of having shelter in place to minimize the possibility of transmission for families. So in that particular case and instance, so laundromats I think are going to be open Monday to Friday from 9 to 5, and there's going to be by appointment only. The Ministry of National Security will be putting out more information on those. The other stores which have been able to be open on a short-term basis are pet shops, hardware stores, that includes paint stores, and plant nurseries. The key point to note on this is that the law is being drafted, so the only stores in this category that will be able to be open will be the stores which have permission of the government to open. So what I don't want you to do is say, oh, I have a general store, but I sell paint, so I'm open. We're trying to make sure that we restrict this. So the Ministry of National Security will make it clear. If that information is not out tonight, it will be out first thing tomorrow morning on what is necessary for these particular businesses to be open, and the processes there. But they will also be restricted, and this is an important point to note. They'll be restricted to your shopping days. So given that we are reverting to Monday is A to F, Tuesday is G to Q, and Wednesday is R to Z, and that starts again back on Thursdays, Fridays, and Saturdays in that order. The hardware stores, the pet stores, and the plant nurseries, because we want people to be productive at home, possibly plant their garden or do some home repairs, will only be open on the Monday, the Tuesday, and the Wednesday, as we're trying to restrict the amount of persons that are moving around. And those will not be open for the retail establishments. They will only be open for curbside pickup for pre-orders only. And that is something that is particularly important. I did see a question which came in earlier regarding why was Sundays moved to 55 and older from 65 and older. And I was actually a little bit concerned about that. So I did pose the question because I know that a few people had come back to me. The Minister of National Security fully explained it, and he explained that it was due to the stores wanted to actually close on Sunday. Because their workers are tired, certainly, and there was a question of what would be needed to try to keep the stores open because of the senior citizens who are by and large not going out of their homes anyhow, which is a good thing. Seniors, please stay home as much as possible. Is that they said if there was possible expansion, then they would consider remaining open on the Sunday. So that's why it was moved down from 65 to 55, just to enable that option to remain there on the Sundays for the stores that are open on Sunday. I know that there are some other questions regarding businesses which are necessary and required to be open as well. There's been a lot of requests for the loosening of exercise, letting people go to the beaches, letting people go to the parks, letting people go all the rest. The answer is no, and I'm really, really sorry. And this is about enforcement. And that's really what it is. This is about enforcement. So we'll see in other places like the US or the UK where they said, oh, we're going to have social distancing, but we're not going to require these things to be closed. And people just tear it. They just do. They cannot be left to discipline themselves. And we have limited enforcement resources. And the fact that the regiment has been embodied, that the police are there, all the rest, everyone, it just spreads the enforcement. And so we're not going to be loosening those restrictions right now because it's important that we maintain what we have and we're able to enforce what it is that we have on the books currently. So from that particular point, I'm sorry. I know people want parks open. I know people want beaches open. I know people want all these things. It lends to our enforcement problems, and that is not what we are trying to do right now. We're trying to make sure that we have limited enforcement, which is necessary. I know that this 2 weeks has been particularly difficult, but it is only 2 more weeks of shelter in place, and we are confident that we will not have to remain in shelter in place and we'll be able to slowly reopen our items, especially the fact that we will have significantly improved testing capacity, which is coming online this week. The other things which were open are pest control operators, and that's for restaurants being closed, and the last we want is for there to be vermin to overrun these pest control these establishments. So in conjunction with the Ministry of Health, those companies will be able to be open. The other thing is that we are allowing courier deliveries on a more expansive basis. And in addition to that, we're also enabling route for taxis to be used for deliveries from establishments, whether they be pharmacies, whether they be stores which are permitted to be open, such as grocery stores as well. So that is something that we are bringing online in the Ministry of National Security. I spoke to the minister a few hours ago, and his staff have been working all day to make sure that these things are put in place in good time. But we want to make sure that we can have as many persons participating while making sure we keep this safe. So courier companies will not be open for you to go and pick up your packages. Absolutely not. That is not happening at all, but there will be some limited delivery options which are available for courier companies and which will be certainly outlined in that area, in that aspect, in that regard. I know that the shelter in place is difficult. I want to remind persons that if you're having a challenge dealing with this, and a big shout out to the Bermuda Psychological Association and the team at the Mid-Atlantic Wellness Institute. Ms. Karis Casey, I saw your name pop up there, which prompted me to remember the excellent work that you all are doing there. But if you are being challenged with your emotional state, please, please, please call 543-1111. That is open every day from 9 to 9, and it is very, very, very important that we take care of our mental and emotional health. but feel free, to use electronic means to do quarantine check-in. I remember I was commenting to one of my friends, like, I haven't hugged my mom in like 6 weeks, and that's just really, really hard. It's just unnormal. It's unusual. But it's the challenge which we have to deal with to make sure we keep people safe in these times. So, but it's important to make sure you try to keep that connection up. You try to have those conversations with persons. And I want to say, big shout out to people who are actually helping our emotional health, and those are all of our DJs across the country who are who are providing their services for persons to be entertained while they are at home through the, I guess I would say, I don't know what to call it, quarantine radio or something along those lines. But there's a large number of Bermudian DJs who have been engaged in that. There's other persons, educators. I know that my children are fortunate to tune in to Brain Hub, which I think is run by Ms. Kimberly Tankard, and also Dr. Karika Weldon does science experiments as well. So I'm fortunate that my children get to participate in that. And there's so many persons around Bermuda who are doing so many different things to help us during this time. So I just want to thank you all. Next week, I did say that the government, because it's important to our emotional health and well-being, will be working to sponsor another next week, Saturday, I believe, of music by our local DJs. So I just want to thank our DJs and all the persons who are working together in building this, I guess I'd say, this virtual community of Bermuda while we are still here having to be remaining in our particular homes. Yes, okay, Mr. Belvedere, and the lockdown chef as well. I think that you are providing people cooking lessons so people can know how to cook at home. That's very important. The trainers who are doing remote classes so people can remain fit. That is something that is very, very, very important. Also, huge shout out to the teachers who are picking back up with remote learning this April 20th, which is on Monday. And it's good. It's going to be a good time to restart that remote learning program. And I would say that the teachers are working have responded very well. And I want to thank those persons all across the country who are having to improvise, because it's not easy to adjust so quickly. But yes, we're certainly having to having to adjust very quickly. And when I say thank yous, it's very interesting. At the end of my press conferences, I try to name everyone, and when I don't name particular people, then I get very, very upset. Not very upset. I get angry mail that people says, "What about us? What about us?" So I just want to say, I'm not going to go through the names. I'm not going to name everyone. I just want to say thank you to everyone, because it is what is all happening together. And this is a particular thing about unity. And people know that I am a very political person by nature. I have always been. But I've actually had to humble myself, and I've had to step back, and I've had to come out of my comfort zone of being very political all the time to be very bipartisan. I speak to the opposition leader just about daily, make sure that we have briefings on from the Ministry of Health and others with the opposition, involving those persons and making sure we involve the community, because it is certainly going to be a challenging time. Coming out of the shelter in place is not meaning the end of this challenge. Our economy is going to be incredibly challenged, and if there was ever a time that the public and the private sectors, both parties, need to work together to make sure we can move forward, the time is certainly now. And I'm gratified by the work which is taking place, the interaction which is taking place on a bipartisan nature, and both with the public and private sectors, our international business community, our local business community, certainly working together to make this bearable and understand what we have to do as we move forward, because we want to find a way to reopen our tourism industry as soon as possible. And I know that makes a lot of people scared, but we are looking into how that can particularly happen, recognizing how big of an employer tourism is here. And Bermuda, there's lots of options. People say Bermuda could be a place where people can feel safe to go and to travel, but we're going to work through that particular process and make sure that we are not going to do anything before it's safe to open. I see a few questions about when the airport will open. I don't have an answer for that, to be honest. I know that given our shelter in place, there's certainly not going to be any commercial air travel into Bermuda until that is ended. However, the law still states that any person who's arrived in Bermuda is required to be in a government-approved quarantine facility. That is the law, and the only person who can forgive persons from that is the Ministry of Health. And so from that perspective, I would just say that we don't know yet, but we're going to not do it until it is safe. I know there was some pushback, certainly, regarding the decision to charge for quarantine facilities for the United Kingdom flight, which is coming in on Friday. And I'll just like to speak to those persons right now. The decision was made to put a price on quarantine facilities because not all persons who are returning are students. And the one thing that I'll say is our corporate community has been very generous. And if you are a student, because you might be a student who's overseas, your family might be out of work, and so I don't want you to feel as though if you cannot come back home because you cannot afford that $100 in that hotel room. We will set up something so you can reach out specifically to us if you're unable to do so, and I'm sure that I will find corporate donors who will be happy to fund that particular cost to make sure they can get our students home. But I really, it's important because as we move forward, and these quarantine requirements aren't enshrined in law, people are arriving in Bermuda on private planes, etc., they can afford to pay. And so it should not be on the taxpayer when we're having limited money to make sure that we can. But I did get a note from a young man on Twitter last night, and he was very upset, and he said, it's hard enough to come with the money to find the flight home, especially after this is a charter flight, so the money we paid for British Airways is now lost. My family's struggling, and I told the young man, I said, get yourself on the plane, and we will find someone to take care of you. And that's, I think, what's important, and that's the Bermuda spirit. But so it's a balancing act with everything, and so we just have to make sure. But the fact is that there are people who can't afford to pay, and the person who can afford to pay, recognizing that this is just what's necessary at this time, should do it. And as we move forward, insofar as possibly more flights arriving, and seeing that we don't want to do self-quarantine because I don't think it's safe to return back there yet. We just want to make sure that people are keeping safe, and we just have to charge a nominal fee for that particular service. All right. Let me try to get back to some of the questions. It says, will students who have returned home from university be able to file for unemployment? Many of us rely on summers to work and have been left without jobs to return to. That's an excellent question. It's something that was actually raised. We're going to make sure we discuss it with the business community because we want there to be as many persons possible making sure that we're continuing to work. Do I believe that we're going to be locked in our houses for the next 6 months? No, I don't believe so. Do I believe that there's going to be some gradual reopening as we've been able to see in other countries in Asia, etc.? Yes. Does that mean that we're likely going to have contact tracing apps that companies may require for their staff to be back at work and fully masked across the island for everyone? Yeah. I mean, I'm looking forward to June and July where there's going to be red and blue masks and blue masks. Around that festive time of the year, but I think we're going to have to adjust to a new reality. So regarding your question about returning for jobs, I want to make sure the economy is open, and it's going to be a little bit different. There's certainly going to be a little bit different, but I want there to be the hope that we're going to make sure that we can have minimal economic activity and make sure that students who are coming back, etc., have the opportunity to try to work. And that's why it's so important for us to see what we can do with our tourism industry specifically. This question, how many tests and swabs are on island currently? I'm going to pull something up because we did get a report in from Dr. Weldon, which had stated precisely what it is that we're looking at overall. From what we are seeing is that I mentioned before we have swabs. We have 10,000 swabs currently on island, so that is no longer the limiting factor. Regarding tests, we have the capacity to do the testing for, I would say, the nursing homes and all the students who are coming out of quarantine. There are 2,000 additional tests which are scheduled to arrive on island on Monday. So that is confirmed and that is traveling through. So we're not worried about being able to continue our aggressive testing regime. We did acquire 10,000. I communicated the Premier of the Cayman Islands. I look to take 10,000 of his tests because a lot of people are asking for them because they're hard to get. So I said I don't mind sharing those to other persons as well. Plus, I think there are additional supplies which have been procured for another company, so for testing. So the bottom line in testing is where we are right now. I am confident that we'll be able to continue our aggressive testing regime and continue to scale it up. Our target, as I said, is 200 tests per day by the end of the month, and I'm hopeful, I'm not hopeful, I'm expecting that we will certainly get there. Between the excellent work of Dr. Desiree Springs at Helix Labs, who in short order was able to get our local testing regime up and running. It's incredible work. She's been working around the clock. Dr. Spriggs, I want to thank you certainly for your work, your energy, and effort. Helix Labs is certainly doing yeoman service for us right now, and it's grateful, and I'm sure that she'll be relieved that we can expand that particular capacity shortly. To take a little bit of, I guess I'd say, heat off of her, since she's had to be worked 7 days a week without a lot of breaks. I'm concerned that the island will go back to square one as soon as airplanes and cruise ships start operating again, meaning the virus will start flowing back to the island. What sort of conversation happened around this topic? I think I kind of addressed that. We're not going to open up anything until it's safe, but we do need to balance this from the reality that the virus we will not be able to eliminate this virus in its entirety from the country. And I think that I know that there's different places in public policy on this, and there are some countries that have said that that's what our goal and objective is. I don't actually think that that's the wisest public policy. I don't actually believe that it is. I think that a policy of shielding, making sure that senior citizens are shielded from the impacts of it. I think that making sure that you test and isolate to make sure that you don't have massive outbreaks of the virus as you continue to have as much operating, and then you can do testing at the borders and other ways, making sure that persons who may be overseas, and there's things which are using blockchain to establish secure, I would say, testing verification, so you know whether or not you've had the virus, know whether or not you have temporary immunity, etc. All those things are the factors which we'll take into account. But my view is that it's not a safe, it's not a wise policy, thought, or decision that we're going to be able to completely eliminate the virus from the country. Because if that was the policy direction which we would go into, that would mean that we would not be able to move around, would not be able to open up our ports, and then we would have to basically be in semi-lockdown mode for 12 to 18 months until until a vaccine is made available, and then to have a vaccination program in Bermuda for enough supplies to be ready so that people can be vaccinated, so that people can be safe to move around. And I don't think that that's feasible, and I don't think that's probably the wisest public policy. So we're still going through those discussions on what that's going to look like. But the modeling is a challenge, and the modeling, which is going to continue to be refined, says in the better case scenario, and that's with aggressive social distancing measures, which puts our reproductive number to 1.4. That means that each person infects 1.4 additional people. We're looking at, as I said, a peak as that goes in September, and 263 persons that will succumb to this disease locally, and that is the better case scenario. So our main concern is balancing life and figuring out how we get to the best combinations of scenarios and combinations of factors to make sure we minimize the loss of life, while also making sure that more people don't die of hunger than will die from the contraction of this highly contagious virus. So it's a very delicate balancing act, but those are all the issues of which we are discussing. It says, I'm a concerned school teacher when it comes to schools reopening. What measures will teachers and students be encouraged to practice to minimize COVID from taking over our schools? Teachers can teach around 25 students in one classroom. How can social distancing be practiced? Those were all valid concerns from the teaching community. I know the Minister of Education and I were discussing how we're going to open this up. We're going to look at what they're doing inside of other schools. The advice, though, is that school reopening is one of the things which are necessary for economic reopening. And as long as you have good processes in place for testing, making sure you do temperature screening, mask wearing, hygiene in schools. It's actually one of the public policy things that they say are probably one of the first things that should open, given the way this virus actually does impact young people. So we're going to have a look in that. We're not going to open it up before it is safe, and we're not going to do anything just to do it beforehand. So we're going to make sure that people our teachers and those persons who work in our schools are certainly safe. It says, please confirm opening requirements for plant nurseries. We still haven't received any response to our messages. I'm very, very sorry. The team has been working around the clock. The national security team is also dealing with the quarantine facilities as well. That message will be back, but the requirements will certainly be along the requirements. And I think that if you look on the coronavirus.gov.bm website, I think you'll see some health notices that are there for other businesses to open, and I think that you should understand and recognize that it will be that it will be along that same line. It'll be along that same line. So thank you. It'll be along that same line. So I'm looking here, and it has resources, it has guidelines for deliveries in grocery stores, pharmacies, and gas stations. Go ahead and take a look at that. It says that all your staff have to be masked, you have to have appropriate hand sanitizer, you have to be able to wipe things down, you have to have contactless things, minimal cash transmission, etc. And those things will be in place. So the only businesses that will be able to operate are those ones that have been verified that they have those particular things in place. But that will come back from the Ministry of National Security, who will be the ones that are going to be empowered under the law. I know there's questions regarding construction. Construction is not going to be open. Actually, the law does not allow any minister to give permission for a construction site to open. Those businesses are closed, and it's unfortunate that they will be closed. I know there's certain persons with the airport project, other projects. Those matters are going to have to remain closed right now. I did see something pop up on the bottom regarding Gilead, and I think that's looking into research of one of their new drugs. I'll pronounce it wrong. I'll butcher it. Do not laugh at me, please. Remdesivir or something along those lines. What I would say is that the hospital and the team at the hospital have been very good. Just like the Ministry of Health in working on this, they've been very good. So they have reached out on a lot of these particular issues and items for these experimental treatments that can be used for compassionate use, which means that if all else fails, then this is something that may be able to be offered. I know that's the protocol of which they're using for hydroxychloroquine, and I'm sure that that's the protocol of which will be used if we can acquire any more of these experimental medicines. There's a question that says, if you have an exemption letter from the ministry for the first 2 weeks of stay at home, is this valid for the next 2 weeks, or do we need to reapply? The minister covered this in his press conference yesterday. We are putting in a legislative bridge, so if you had it for the first 2 weeks, you do not need to reapply. Key point, you do not need to reapply. A question, what sacrifice will the government be making during this time, pay cuts, etc.? That is a valid question. The Minister of Finance on Wednesday had indicated very clearly that nothing is off the table. I can say that that's not something that the government has turned its attention to right now. I know it's something the Minister of Finance is actually working through, because he, as he had indicated on Wednesday, that his budget is, not worth the paper that it was printed on because of the big changes. But we are going to have to look at the new projected revenue figures, given that our tax revenue is going to be significantly less, the expense figures, and figure out what changes and adjustments are going to have to be made. And so we're certainly going to have to, good night, Princess. We're certainly going to have to get that taken care of. You want to say hi to everyone?
Hi.
Okay.
Oh my, this is crazy.
Yeah, okay. Night, Princess.
Night, Daddy.
Love you, all right? And make sure you actually go to sleep, okay? Don't stay up and be playing upstairs. I feel really bad for, not really bad, but it's difficult, I know. So as I'm giving a shout out to everyone, I want to give a shout out to all the parents who had to be at home with their children and homeschool and do all those particular items, because I know that it is not easy, and I know that my wife is an absolute star, because I've been out of the office a little bit, out of the house a little bit this week, in the office doing WebEx meetings, etc. And it's been really, really, really challenging for a lot of parents. So I just want to say a particular shout out to the parents who I know who are of young children, who I know this has been particularly hard on. Yeah, and the children seem to get more restless as they're at home. So it's almost like the school routine and everything calms them down when they're here, and they're just going stir crazy. That's a lot. Okay, so I see some questions here that are flowing regarding confusion around an exemption letter from the ministry for the first 2 weeks is valid for the next 2 weeks, and then someone saying the police said we had to reapply. I don't want there to be confusion. Let me just make sure that I make this clear. When we first did the curfew was under the Summary Offenses Act. The curfew under the Summary Offenses Act required exemptions to go to the police. When we moved from the curfew to the 24-hour shelter in place, that was under a new law. And underneath that new particular law, the exemptions were done by the Ministry of National Security. So if you had exemptions for a curfew, those did not carry over onto the shelter in place, and they had to be given exemption from the Ministry of National Security and not Bermuda Police Service. So in this next 2 weeks of shelter in place, if you have permission from the Ministry of National Security, an exemption letter from the Ministry of National Security, you do not need to reapply. So I just want to make sure that we make that crystal clear. This is an interesting one. It says, our charity Cats operates feeding stations across the island for stray cats. Many of our volunteers are distressed because they are worried about the cats not being fed. Why isn't feeding cats permitted, and can we at Cats Bermuda get an exemption? I think the Minister of National Security has been rather clear on this particularly. We're trying to minimize the amount of persons that are outside of their houses. I don't want animal rights people to get upset at me. I think that the Minister has made some minor provisions to figure out how this can actually work. But I do not believe that there's going to be a blanket exemption, because I think he said he got a request for about 100 persons to be exempted for this particularly. So I think the minister's spoken on that, and I don't have any particular information, but I support the minister's approach to this, and I want to give a shout out, as I've said, a few of my cabinet colleagues, so certainly all of them. The Minister of National Security, who's putting in double duty, continues to work over his multiple Sabbaths, and I see has now joined me on Twitter to try to continue to engage with persons. Certainly the Minister of Health, who health is not her background, but who's having to be learned up and continuing on this. But her team there at the Ministry of Health are working very, 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 very hard, and I just want to thank them for their work and their efforts. Chief Medical Officer, who's on her way out. Actually, she's due to retire shortly, and no one would have thought, I guess, in the twilight of her career, she would be managing the worst global pandemic in 102 years. So she is doing it. I see a comment below that says, let the cats feed on the rats that we're seeing. I didn't say it, you did. All right. So it says, I want to thank you for listening when it comes to laundromats being open. However, what I'm not understanding is why is it only one person at a time? I recognize your concern. This was a health issue. And we're trying to make sure we balance and minimize the transmission, which is taking place. So with your particular question, good night, Ed. Come here. Good night, hugs. We're trying to minimize the I would say transmission which takes place, and so there was a lot of consultation between the Ministry of Health and us. Erica, say hi to everyone. You're not going to say hi? Okay. Check you later, bye. Good night.
Good night.
Hey. Make sure you go to sleep, okay?
Yes.
Don't be up there playing.
I'm going to get it.
And so I know that there's these related questions about this issue. We're trying to manage as best as possible, and the real thing is just to minimize transmission. I also know that there's delivery services that are going to be opening up for laundry pickup and drop off, and that might also be another option. I know that MP Christopher Famous is working to see if we can utilize the staff at hotels to possibly do that for drop off and pickup as well. So we're working through all of those particular instances. I know that it is not ideal. I get it, I recognize it, I understand it, but we're trying our best to balance everything. And I know it's not ideal for everyone, but I do recognize that it's easy for someone like me to say who has a washer and dryer in my house, whereas there are persons who don't. So that's the reason why I wanted to make sure they're open. And as I said, the Ministry of National Security will be putting out communications on that. I know they're working with various laundromats around the country to make sure this is a reality so we can provide relief to persons who certainly need to wash clothes, whether they be persons taking care of young people like us, children who pee the bed, or also seniors who are incontinent, and it's not realistic to say, wash your clothes at home and all the rest. So that will happen this Monday, and we're looking to do our best to facilitate that process as quickly as possible. There's another question about how do we see things moving forward to plane and cruise ship arrivals. I think we saw that. It says, will DHA and FedEx be resuming normal operations of non-essential goods? DHL and FedEx will not be resuming normal operations. They will be able to be doing home deliveries for non-essential goods. Will local retailers who offer contactless delivery be allowed to resume deliveries? No, not at this time. It is not permitted in this first phase of the renewed shelter in place because those businesses are not technically allowed to be open under the law. So the law is very clear and distinct that all retail is closed with the exception of the items which are laid out. And so if you're a retail establishment, even if you do that type of contactless delivery, it is not able to be open right now. What I would say is to take this time to make sure your online services are ready, available, and working, because as we move into the next phase, not knowing when exactly that will be, there may be some limited allowances for those type of things to happen. But right now, no. And I know that's a very hard thing to say, but we are trying to minimize the possibility for multiple persons or people from different households to be inside the same place, because we are actively doing a policy right now of suppression. And we want to make sure we suppress this virus. We had a big uptick this week from Matilda Smith Nursing Home. We haven't seen large uptake inside of the community outside of Matilda Smith Nursing Home, so that is encouraging, certainly. But we need to make sure we keep that up. I saw a comment about garages. Those are not scheduled to be open right now at this point in time. I know there's a discussion with the Ministry of National Security, but the fact is we are literally dealing with essentials right now, and we are doing our best to make sure that we make the next 2 weeks bearable, but also remembering that this is not an opening and a free-for-all. So the only retail businesses which are allowed to be open are the ones which are specified in law, and any other business that is open is in violation of the law. Can you advise when One Communications and other similar services will be allowed to enter homes to make installations? I don't believe that installations are permitted. I believe that emergency services for repairs are permitted under the law, and no one's allowed to enter a home where a particular individual might be under a quarantine, etc. But that will happen when the shelter in place is over. To get a better handle on figuring out who is asymptomatic, have there been any thoughts to testing one person per household? Not yet. There have been any thoughts to that. We will lay out the complete testing strategy now that we have more testing capacity. We'll either do that at our press conference on Monday or on Wednesday. As I said, I've received a draft item from Dr. Weldon, who has been... who, before people start making noise, who has been appointed as an advisor to me officially, but she is on a peppercorn contract, so I think it's 1 penny a year for that. But I do want to say that she's working in conjunction with the Ministry of Health on finalizing testing strategy, which can be released to the public, and we'll probably do that when we also release the modeling data to the public. But we certainly are going to have a very broad and wide aggressive testing strategy. There's someone who says, when will child support payments be made, and can we borrow off our contributory pension even if we already have been, given these desperate times? I do believe that by the time we go back to the House of Assembly on May 8th, there will be legislation that's going to allow persons to access additional hardship from their pensions. We need to be very careful with that, but certainly that is an avenue that can provide relief, and this is without question the most extraordinary circumstance that exists. So I know the Minister of Finance is working through various issues and items, so that is something that we've certainly considered. Given that parents are busy all day trying to juggle childcare, working from home, does it not make sense to allow exercise to happen in hours before family are awake and after they've gone to sleep? For example, extend exercise hours. Sorry, no. You just can't right now. You can exercise in your home. You can exercise outside of your home. I'm sorry, but we are keeping the 7 to 7 in place, and we're just trying to make sure that we can keep enforcement very simply. It says, I bought a car last month from a dealership. I was supposed to receive it beginning of April. When will dealerships be allowed to open? Those businesses will likely be allowed to resume services after this current shelter-in-place ends. That would be May 2nd. Is it possible to have the curfew extended to 8 as it's getting a little bit hotter and people like to exercise when the sun is less strong? No, we are keeping at 7 to 7. I know there's a lot of changes. We're trying to make this as simple as possible. Every time there's changes, people get confused. Why is cycling not allowed as an exercise using the same half-mile radius as walking and running are allowed to? There's a decision to make for enforcement purposes of not doing the cycling. That might be something that may be reconsidered for not next week, but right now it is still limited to walking or on foot, so you can run too. Will there be a travel ban from New York? Those things have not been yet considered. Any types of movement, certainly from places where they have high incidences of this particular virus, is a challenge. So certainly there'll be certainly considerations given to places where there are, a very large outbreak and what that will mean to us here in Bermuda. Any consideration to allowing curbside pickup or delivery for stores like Red Laser, A.S. Smith for office and school supplies while we work from home and home at school? This is something that has been raised. It's something that we will certainly look to consider. And I know a few persons have raised it privately to me, and the thought when people says, oh yeah, we're homeschooling people and we're out of paper and out of these particular things. I think that's a particular challenge, but we will see. But right now, they are not scheduled to be open. I appreciate the opening of the nurseries. Is there any chance we can shop and select as we do in the grocery store? Sorry, no. Can we have a list of scheduled travel dates for flying expats back to the UK who contract figure over the summer, please? I don't know when rescheduled travel will restart, so I'm sorry. I don't actually have that. Have you considered proposing schools an early summer break of, say, May and June, July, and have next school year start earlier? This relieves stress on parents and teachers trying to juggle work and teaching. It is a consideration. The Minister of Education is liaising with a lot of different persons on that. So we will see where we end up. Those are things that are being considered, and those are discussions which are happening with the Board of Education. My personal view is we want to get schools reopened as quickly as possible, as soon as it's safe to do so, given that the international advice is that's one of the things in which you want to make sure to do in order for your economy to be open and the risk of which it provides. But we're going to make sure we balance that very carefully. Will government check each business to ensure that those businesses are in true need of assistance or are not making profits? Example, schools, nurseries still charging a fee for the parents? Absolutely. The assistance programs are going to be done through the Bermuda Economic Development Corporation, who's very good at making sure they examine these particular businesses. The $12 million, which was announced by the Minister of Education, by the Minister of Finance at our press conference on Wednesday, and also the follow-up from Ms. Erika Smith, the Executive Director of the Bermuda Economic Development Corporation, speaks about these grants and loans. I did happen to read a very unfortunate Royal Gazette article about the loans that we had put into, not the loans, the projects which were being put into place to support small business. and persons complaining about, oh, well, we don't need loans, we need grants and all the rest. A large portion of that $12 million is for grants, and it is not just for loans. And so the BDC is going to outline exactly what that looks like, but we've looked at what is being done in other countries around the world, and we are modeling that, modeling our assistance programs off of that. So yes, there will not just be loans, there will be grants, but we are going to make sure it's only in the businesses that need it. So businesses that are operating, et cetera, such as you said, will be the type of businesses which may not be eligible. There being so many obituaries at the moment, is COVID testing being done on everyone who has died recently? And not everyone, but I do believe that there is some form of testing that is taking place, and that's all due to a coroner stuff. So I'm going to try to get you a little bit more clarity on that, because I know that there was a question about that, which had taken place, and it came up in the meeting, the briefing that we actually had with the members of the opposition, the One Bermuda Alliance, and the officials from the hospital and the Ministry of Health. What is the rationale for reducing the age to 55? I covered that earlier. If seniors are most at risk and the majority of essential workers are on the front lines, why are they shopping on the same day? Is this putting more seniors at risk? Here's the one thing I'll say. I'll say at all impacts, if your seniors can stay home, stay home. That's the best thing which I'd say. I think I explained that whole rationale for that, but I'm just trying to balance as best as possible. For people who work from home on the day, would it be possible to shop on Sunday with seniors? I would say ask your employer to let you out for shopping for an hour. Something that my wife had to do earlier this week, and I would hope that our employers would actually allow that to happen. Would it not be better to have Sunday split into two halves, one for seniors and one for persons with challenges, the other for essential workers only? That's an excellent suggestion, and I will refer that to the Minister of National Security. Thank you for that particular suggestion. Any idea when financial institutions like Western Union and MoneyGram will be able to be open? I kind of addressed it earlier that MoneyGram has launched an online service, wallet.bm. Those were something that were possibly considered, but those were not something that were allowed at this point in time, as we're trying to restrict movement as much as possible. So I would say that definitively, I would expect that May 2nd they will be able to reopen. Question relates to immigration passport renewals. I submitted my son's passport application on March 12th. Will immigration be open anytime soon, or is there someone who can provide me with an update or even the application number which I can use on the UK passport website for an update? That's a good question. I think that the Department of Immigration might be sending out something soon, but that is certainly something for follow-up. And it's certainly, I think that the Department of Immigration had put out a press release. I think that even the minister, the director, had said that you can email her directly. But I will try to follow up on that and post that on social media in direct response to your question, whether this came in on Facebook or Twitter or somewhere else. I'll try to make sure we can post a direct response to that question on how you can get the follow-up on that. How are you keeping during this pandemic? Better now. Better. Last weekend and Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday this week were really, really hard. I mean, I told people on Twitter that I actually broke down in a cabinet meeting in tears. Like, it was like the emotional stress is a lot, and we are dealing with so much things. So when you're dealing with the balancing at home with family and children. Anytime I leave my house, my children, cry and wail, like, Daddy, wanting to stay because they're anxious as well. The challenge, of course, when you have to announce people who have succumbed to this particular virus is very emotional. The challenge of the outbreak at Matilda Smith was something that was really, really hard as well. And the challenge of working in so many aspects to get our testing thing up and running. It's been very, very, very draining. But I'm better now. I think that, and I say that because there is progress being made. So you get very frustrated when you're trying to push on so many different things, and it's hard. Like, it's really, like Monday, we were all excited. We're like, yes, this BA flight's coming in, or the Monday before, yes, this BA flight's coming in, and it's got all these swabs and we're okay, and it was supposed to come, and then there were no swabs in the flight. It's like, and so you're trying to scramble and do these things, so you're hopeful that you're going to be able to do this, or the BA flight was supposed to have this on it, and it's not actually there. So it's like, okay, so it's a roller coaster of emotions. But certainly better. I think the cabinet's better. We've made sure that we've involved more of our caucus colleagues, so a big shout out to them on the Progressive Labour Party benches who are helping us put together our plans based on education, healthcare, the economy, submitting ideas as well. So so I think we're certainly in a better place. And in a better place. I think I'm a little bit more relaxed this week than I was before. So, and I see light at the end of the tunnel. So the fact that we do have this testing up, the fact that we're doing other things, it is certainly getting better. And I think that the country will be in a better space. It's hard when you think about these things, but this virus is a sickness, and people will succumb to it. Our job is to minimize the persons who do through our public policy responses, but we have to be very careful, and we have to, balance. And I think that's the hardest thing, balancing, where is the appropriate line to strike that particular balance. By closing beaches, parks, and railway trails, we are forcing families with young children to exercise the roads. Most roads in Bermuda do not have sidewalks, and they're still busy. It's extremely dangerous. Any provision to solve this danger, sorry, I spoke about this earlier, it is enforcement. I know that it's difficult, but we want to make sure that we can enforce this as best as possible. In reference to railway trail access, how does it pertain to persons who reside directly on the railway trail? When exercising, are they not allowed to use a part of the trail that's nearest their property, or must they travel to the nearest main road? I don't have a particular answer to that, so I'm going to ask the Minister of National Security and follow up. I think I actually know who asked that question. Big shout out to you, my mate, Willie Clements. But we will get you an actual answer. As you can see today, I was wearing a football jersey last time we were here. I'm representing our national cricket team today. Shout out to all of our athletes who are keeping us entertained on Twitter, certainly, and in other places, unquestioned. Will pass slips for vehicles be extended past 3 months? I think the answer to that is yes. I know that there's going to be legislative changes that are possibly going to skip some of the inspections which have been able to take place. As I said, TCD is going to be opening for Skeleton online call-in service, but you can also renew your vehicles online right now once you've insured them. So if your vehicle expired and you want to just renew your license, you can go online right now and go to etcd.gov.bm and renew your car registration or bike registration online as it stands right now. This is a good question. Thank you for your service. Will expired driver's licenses be given the same exemptions as vehicle licenses? I guess the answer is yes. It has to be. So I appreciate that one. We'll certainly get some clarity on that, but that's a good question. I would say the answer is yes, and I'd say happy belated birthday to you. Hard having a birthday during quarantine with no birthday party, but I hope you had a good online birthday party. Will there be follow-up for testing for the residents of the rest homes that previously tested negative in the event that some may now be experiencing symptoms? Absolutely, without question, if that's the case. But in a situation like that, I think that those persons they certainly might be retested. I don't want to speak directly to the testing matters, but I would say that when it comes to nursing homes, we are not playing it. We are going to make sure that we do the testing that's necessary. I do not want there to be severe outbreaks in our nursing homes. They have been doing excessive contact tracing. All the persons who may have worked at Matilda Smith and may have worked at other homes, making sure and assessing and judging the risk. And as we bring on new testing capacity this week, there is certainly going to be more things that are going to be done. My exemption letter never came. I have not been home for over 3 weeks as I'm caring for my mother. No caregivers as they do not drive here. There are no buses. I was just asked this person to please send an email to me directly, primer@gov.bm. I'm not entirely certain of your circumstance, but this is a difficult and challenging time, but we'll try our best to make sure that we can accommodate. My question is there anything on separated or divorced people with children? My son has autism, and not seeing his father is taking a big toll on him. I think that the Minister of Legal Affairs did announce that there's going to be some changes with this. Yes, it says there was announced. I don't have it in front of me. There are changes that are being made on this particular instance. For the person who asked this question, well, is there anything that can be done for separated and divorced people? I am going to see if we can give you a direct line to wherever you asked your particular question from. With the goal to flatten the curve, would it be more sensible to keep people home but allowing stores to deliver as opposed to everyone coming out and about? Yes, it would be. That's why we are encouraging more delivery to happen through the taxi drivers, etc., over the next 2 weeks, and encouraging persons to ramp up their delivery services. Imperfect as it is, The one thing I would just say, everyone, for those people who are using shopping, and I don't want us to think that everyone's running out to the supermarket, because the fact that there are lines, because there's a limited amount of people that are let in, and because before, where there were no limits amount of people that come in, that there weren't lines. I don't want people to think that there's a larger volume of people that are shopping, because I think the feedback from the grocery stores is not exactly a larger volume of people that have been shopping. But here's what I would say: don't go out if you don't have to. You are putting yourself at risk. Trust me when I say that. My wife was telling me the other day she doesn't want to go to the grocery store unless she has to. But I will say that delivery services are expensive, and we are working to make sure we bring those prices down by giving there be more choice and options by the use of taxis and others things. After yesterday's press conference, do you think that people now feel as though the restrictions are too loose and encourage more people to leave their homes and more than out and about? There might be that risk, but that's the reason why we have been very specific in limiting it. So the people who were out were the people who were allowed to go out grocery shopping. And the only additional measures which they will have is they're able to pick up pre-ordered items at hardware stores or others. But I must warn and caution people that if you are silly enough to let someone into your house during this period, recognize that you put your family at risk, and recognize that you put your country at risk. It is hard, but don't do it. Just don't. Resist the urge. I mean, even your neighbors. Everyone wants to talk to neighbors. Just put on a mask if you want to talk to your neighbors. That's the thing. Don't maintain your social distance. This is not a joke, and I cannot in any way, shape, or form emphasize how serious this disease is. And that's the reason why anyone who's going out in public is encouraged to wear masks. There's people questioning whether or not we're going to make that mandatory. There hasn't been a decision on that right now, but it's certainly something that we're going to have to consider. We've seen it happen in a lot of places. Has anything been put in place regards to seniors receive their pensions by checks? Yes, and they are being delivered by the post office, and I think they were actually delivered early. There's a question as to whether the senior shopping day should be on a different day. That's a good point, but unfortunately we're past that. That is a great suggestion, so wish we would have had that suggestion before, but sorry. Can you advise if there will be deferment on the payment of payroll tax until after May 2nd? The Minister of Finance did put out a release on that, speaking about the deferrals that are able. They are done on a case-by-case basis. As stated, that there's a large number of international businesses and other businesses that are able to continue to operate. And those persons are going to pay and file their taxes as usual. But I do know that there was information that's put on that, and I will ask for a specific response to be happening. For those persons who clearly pay their payroll taxes in person, but there are no fees, there are no late charges. So the Minister of Finance did say that there are not going to be any late charges per se, but persons who have the ability to file their taxes are encouraged to file their taxes, because in order to fund unemployment benefits, in order to fund government services, in order to fund testing and other things, the government does require revenue. And although there's large sectors of the economy which are not functioning, there's a large amount of people who are working from home, who are inside of business services, etc., who are still working, who are still functioning. Can you address why there's so much secrecy here regarding cases versus larger countries? For example, why haven't the papers here reported who sadly died of the disease? I don't think it's secrecy. I think it's just privacy. And I think that our Ministry of Health, in a public health thing, and I've actually had to accept this, because some of the challenges of which we were getting in the early phases is that public health actually requires confidence that your information is going to be private. So you will share it with public health officials. And if you don't feel comfortable sharing your information with public health officials, that actually puts the entire country at risk, because people don't want to give answers. So I think earlier we'd seen people who might have violated home quarantine or self-quarantine who didn't want to tell us that they had violated self-quarantine because they were afraid of the repercussions, but it was something that was necessary in order to contact trace. So we don't, and Bermuda is a very small community, so we just don't want to do those things. So I recognize what it is that you're saying, but it's a delicate balance, and I'm comfortable with the position that the Ministry of Health has taken regarding not releasing of that particular information. I would like to know if you could give any input on hazard pay. I heard a number of people at KMHC feel it should be considered at this time. I don't have any thoughts or opinions on that. I would just say I appreciate and applaud all the frontline workers who continue to put themselves at risk, and the fact that I know that there was an additional 600,000 masks which arrived on island yesterday to bolster our stock of PPE. I know we got face shields that also arrived earlier this week, so we are certainly making sure that we can bolster and protect those persons on the front line. I know that I'm near past the time. I started about 9:05, and 7:35, but I know there's a few questions that came in when we started, so I'm going to try to address those, and then I will be signing off for the night. Just a thing, there was a question, where did you get that 263 number from? It in no way compares with worldwide stats. This is the modeling information which we have, which was done in conjunction with Public Health England and Imperial College of London. The Minister of Health has indicated that that they look to finish that modeling over the weekend, and when it's finished, either this Monday or this Wednesday, we'll be releasing that information to the public so they can see the background behind those particular numbers. I know that people say that it in no way compares with worldwide stats, but we have to understand that we are a small community, and the fact is that, and we are an older community, and so this transmission can happen, and that's the modeling, and it's dangerous to compare the experience of other countries and the reporting versus taking the look at the entire population, I would say. It says, if we purchase transportation passes for the months that transport was suspended, would we be given a refund or any replacement of such passes? I would certainly say I'll just make a policy decision now, which I might get in trouble for, but I can do that. Yes, I won't want you to pay for something and not get that service. So certainly we'll consider how that's going to work, but absolutely. Are there any arrangements for a flight from the U.S.? I don't believe so at this point in time. I would encourage all persons who who are stranded, who are looking to return, and remember, these are residents, not persons who may have moved, who want to move back to Bermuda. We are repatriating residents, to make sure you sign up on the forms. And as I said, if you go to gov.bm, that big red banner on top, it has COVID-19 forms. And if you go to those forms, in addition, we have lots of different forms on there. We have a shelter-in-place exemption form. We have a COVID-19 rental relief form if you're having issues when it comes to dealing with your landlords when it comes to rental. There's a form that's on there. There's the price gouging complaint form, which is also on there that you may be able to fill out. There's a traveler screening form. There's a question of exemptions to quarantining at home. And so those are for instance, everyone is required to do mandatory quarantine in a government facility. But for certain instances, like for instance, I think there was a minor who we can't have, so it's about making sure we do that. The unemployment benefits are there. The employment violations tip lines if you're having an issue, and also people who are stranded overseas so they can return home. I don't actually see that on here. Oh, here it is, yes. And returning Bermudian residence home form. So if you are stranded and you want to come back, you can fill that form in. It is this kind of thing, we're running kind of like Uber jets, so when there's private planes that are coming to Bermuda, sometimes they're coming to Bermuda empty to take people from here, other times, and so we're asking them if they're coming empty or if they have empty seats to make sure that we go ahead and put people on those particular flights. Look at that. There's a question that says, would there be considerations to the idea of a home quarantine exemption instead of government hotel quarantine on a case-by-case basis? There's a form right up there on the website, so you can fill that in. Is there a plan in place for some kind of relief to the tourism industry, cruise ships and flights? Absolutely, yes. That will be handled through the Bermuda Economic Development Corporation, but we certainly are going to have a challenged tourism season. There's a lot of things that we're looking to do. One of the things is that in Bermuda, we spend over $300 million on external travel. $300 million. And so as we lift these things, we're certainly going to be working with our tourism partners to promote more people spending that money here. And staycations and otherwise. I know it's kind of hard, we're kind of small, everyone's itching to get on that plane, but it might not be the safest place for you to go. And if you want a little time away, then I think that staycations are at local hotels, and if they provide those type of rates, I think it might be something that we're able to be considered. Covered this earlier, the protocol for releasing COVID-19 patients, thought of suspending school, covered that earlier, talked about the sacrifices and pay cuts, spoke about that earlier. Is the Ruby Princess ship going to be allowed to dock in Bermuda? I don't have an answer for you on that one. I don't believe that any ship has been given permission to dock in Bermuda, but I think that there may be consideration that might be given in the future if it can be something that is safe. So we're just going to have to see about that, but I would be hesitant. I know we denied a lot of other cruise ships the ability to do so, but there may be a limit of which we can do regarding Bermuda flag vessels, so we just have to continue to look into that. So I don't have an answer yet. Is the government facing any difficulty regarding our credit rating? The Minister of Finance has been in touch with credit ratings agencies and looking at our economic recovery plan. Standard & Poor's just confirmed our ratings and issued our outlook at stable, so they're not considering any debt downgrades, ratings downgrades at this point in time. Can you please tell us the person who called from police officers and claimed he was positive for coronavirus was tested to see if he was not? I don't know. But probably actually would be able to release that, as his name is probably now known, so that would kind of be a violation of patient confidentiality, so I don't want to get there. I don't actually believe that he was, however, but I don't have a specific answer to that question. It says, I don't understand why the alphabetical system applies to gas stations. Do people just get gas for fun? And I'm just saying that we had to try to restrict travel as much as possible. I have a horse, and I'm wondering if I'm allowed to hand walk him to Church Bay for exercise and eat grass there. I'm uncertain on that. I would say that you can submit your particular exemption request to the Ministry of National Security. I know that animal feed was always open, but I do not believe that that may qualify for going out. How many people at the Matilda Smith facility tested positive or showing no symptoms? That is a question that has been asked. It's information that's been requested. I don't actually have it. I'm sure it'll be asked again at a future press conference, and I will implore the Minister of Health to be able to have that particular answer. But we do know that there is asymptomatic transmission. Some people argue whether it's asymptomatic or pre-symptomatic, etc. But we are going to, as we are widening our testing regime, we are completely cognizant of the issue when it comes to asymptomatic. What is the ultimate long-term plan for opening Bermuda? I think I spoke at that at length earlier in the broadcast. Is Tynes Bay going to be open to the public? I spoke about that earlier in the broadcast as well. The answer is no. I know that these are very hard decisions to make, but the answer is no. You mentioned that all patients being admitted to the hospital are being tested for COVID-19. Has the Minister of Health previously advised the public that they cannot test on patients that are not displaying symptoms because it could cause a false negative? Can you expand and clarify the testing the hospital is doing in patients? All I can say is that it's not that we cannot test, it's not the practice of testing when you have limited testing supplies. We are not necessarily still in the limited testing supply situation that we were 2 weeks ago, and so you have to apply your tests to places where they are most useful. But as I did say, we are doing all patients who are being admitted are being charged. People want to know if you have watched Tiger King on Netflix. What's that?
It's the most popular show in the world.
Oh, I don't have a chance to watch TV. The only time I get to watch TV is if I'm watching Disney Plus with me and Ed. What? Nah, I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry I haven't watched Tiger King. I don't know what that is. I'll try to figure it out. And no, I won't be watching Tiger King because I need to sleep. I'm trying to get through these. I think I have one more page of questions, the last one, and then we'll be ready to sign off. I think we answered that already. Oh, whoa. I think this is the, okay. Oh, we've already gone through these 3 pages. Okay. I think that is about it. Let's make sure. A lot of these questions I answered already. A lot of persons asked questions on Tynes Bay. Okay. So, I'm happy that I've been able to get through a large number of questions. I'm gratified that I was able to do this again this evening. I know that we have 2 more weeks of this shelter in place, or 13 and a half days left. I know it's not easy, but I know that it's important for us to save lives. I cannot stress and emphasize enough. If you do not need to go outside to a place where you'll be in contact with people from other households, do not do it. If you do go outside, make sure you wear a mask, make sure you maintain proper hand hygiene, make sure you keep your distance. All these things are things which are going to become part of our regular life. And we're going to just have to be able to adjust them as we go forward. I see a final question about cup match. It is undetermined right now, so I can't actually say. People will know how painful it would be for me to have to say it. I don't think that we'll be able to not play the game. Like they're having, I think, the Premier League reopen with no fans, and we're just going to have to see what that looks like, but no determination has been made yet. So I want to thank everyone who tuned in, thank everyone who sent in their question. There's a few questions that we need to get back and respond to. I would typically have got those responses in advance, but I will admit to everyone, I took a nap this afternoon, so I was actually asleep from 3 to 6, and when I woke up at 6, there was a whole bunch of emails from the Minister of Health and a few other persons, so I wasn't able to get as much prep in as I normally did. But thank you to my wife for letting me have that nap. I do feel great and certainly rested. But thank the viewers. I think we hit 2.1 K or 2,100 people, so thank you very much. If you have more questions, feel free to continue to send them via direct message. And if you have those particular questions, or premier@gov.bm, and we'll do our best to help and assist. As I give thanks to my staff or in the government, I also want to thank my staff who work for me, who answer all of those questions and make sure that we can get those responses and filter all of those particular things, because I don't actually tend to them all myself. So just a great thanks and shout out to the staff that work. It's very interesting that we get an incredible amount of criticism in the political sphere for people of whom they call consultants. But those are the persons who work on individual ministers and my own personal staff to make sure that these particular queries are answered, to make sure that we can get help and assistance to the people of whom they need. And if we did not have those persons, we wouldn't be able to provide the level of response at which we do. We wouldn't be able to have things like this. We wouldn't be able to get that interaction. So special thank you to the staff that continue to work during this time. Thank you to all essential workers throughout the country. You know who you are, so I just want to say thank you. You're doing an excellent service to the entire country, and I'm not going to get in trouble naming everyone because I'll leave one off, but I just want to say thank you. Certainly. Without question, as I said before, but one more time, thanks to the ministers who continue to work day in and day out. They're working extra long hours, their staff, their permanent secretaries, their ministry staff, all the heads of departments who are having to improvise and having to do things right now. I just want to say thanks to them. My backbench who continues to filter information off the ground and are the ones who make sure that we keep on our toes and are being very responsive to concerns. That's something that is certainly a strength for the government as we move forward, and certainly whether it be the people in the Senate as well, and also members of the opposition, as I've mentioned. Without question, I just want to remind everyone, if you're going outside, make sure you wear a mask and make sure you do not interact. This is going to be a long additional 13 and a half days, but I can assure you that it will be worth it as a country. We are going to move forward. We did launch a site, forum.gov.bm, which you can go online and express your thoughts and ideas on economic recovery and law change in which you want to see. There is certainly going to be on there also consultation on a number of other government projects which have been stalled, which we're trying to make sure that we advance. So I know that the Attorney General is going to be placing up the cannabis consultation shortly online, as well as other consultations there. So I want persons to make sure they keep active. Additionally, I do know that the Department of Workforce Development, the FinTech Business Unit, is making more online courses available for free. Please make sure we use this time as productively as possible. So with that, I want to say good night to everyone in Bermuda. Thank you for your thoughts. Thank you for your encouragement. Thank you for your prayers. Thank you for your concern. And I hope that we will all continue to be unified as a country and continue to pray for those who have lost loved ones and those persons who have contracted this virus, who are battling it, whether